Hello, everyone. Before everyone logs in to our webinar today, we're going to be asking our panelists where are they dialing from and what is the day like today for them. So we're going to be starting with Sweta. Hi, Sweta.
Hi, I'm Shweta Bhandari and I'm an engineering leader. I am in Boulder, Colorado, and the day is nice and calm for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Sweta. Next up, we're going to go to Liam.
Hi, I'm Liam. I'm dialing in from London. It's currently sunny there, which is quite surprising, but it is.
Thank you, Liam. And now we go on to Michael.
Hey, yeah, I'm Michael, also dialing in from London, also nice and sunny, so maybe I'm not too far away from Liam. And today, yeah, day is going very well so far, thank you.
Amazing. And Dima?
Good to be here. I made it from London to Warsaw 2 weeks ago, and it's surprisingly not too hot, which is wonderful.
Amazing. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Blanca, and I'm joining today actually from northern Spain, and it's actually quite sunny for a change. So we're going to be starting the webinar now. We have a few people already with us. So hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on how to master the four staff archetypes and elevate your impact. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the Lead Dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the Staff Plus channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. Right, let's get started with some introductions. My name is Blanca, and today I'll be joined by Sweta, Michael, Liam, and Dima. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Could you please answer in 60 seconds who you are and tell us what makes you excited about this webinar? We're going to be going in alphabetical order by name, so we're going to be starting with Dima.
Well, that's a curse of having the name that starts from early in the alphabet. Hi, I'm Dima. I used to be a competitive programmer, and then I had a career in large companies, Google, Microsoft, a bunch of startups, some acquired, and for the past 5 years, I'm mostly on the architect side, which fits for a staff role solidly. And yes, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me over, and let's explore this together.
Thank you, Dima, and welcome. Next will be Liam.
Hi, so I'm Liam. I'm from France, but currently based in London. I've been a staff engineer for the last 4 years. I mainly work in startups and scale-ups, so only like smaller size company. Currently, I'm working in archetypes, a healthcare company of about 200 people. My experience are like in very different industries, so healthcare, education, fintech, food. So kind of like jumping from different startups in different industries.
Thank you, and welcome. And now we're on to Michael.
Hey, yeah, I'm Michael, nice to meet everybody. So I've been a principal engineer for about the past 3 years. Before that, my background for most of my career was in mobile engineering, and I sort of moved from that now, looking after a few different areas, mainly client side, a little data engineering in there too. I've also had a little stint doing management for a sort of very short time at a startup, but decided that wasn't for me. And I'm just really interested to be on the panel today because I've sort of been finding my path at my current company since moving into the role, touching on, a few of the different areas. And it's just really good to hear because I think it's sometimes quite tough to know if what you're doing is the right thing or seeing there's other people in similar roles who are doing different things to you, but understanding there's many different paths to take. So yeah, great to be here and really excited.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more, Michael. And last but not least, Sweta.
Hi, I'm Shweta Bhandari, and currently I'm an independent biotech consultant at Determined Dolphins. That's my own LLC. I have been a principal engineer now for about 6 years, which is a little shocking to me when I was thinking about it. But it has been, and I've done this role across industry, education with Pearson. People are from London here, so they would understand. But with Pearson for a few years, and then I did a health tech startup, a little bit of mobile stuff, but also building out a whole health tech platform for Clio. And the last 3 years have been with Recursion, which is a tech biopharma company. So this has been a very varied experiences as a principal engineer, and it's something I really love because I find that it allows me to stay technical and solve technical problems, but also work with people. And that's the part that excites me the most. And I'm most excited about this webinar because I actually feel I've had the honor to play these archetypes at least 2 times or 3 times per, each of these archetypes. So I'm really excited to share experiences, hear from others, and see how this goes. I'm super excited. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I am so excited to learn from all of your experiences because at the end of the day, this is a community where we're learning and sharing with each other. So, as a staff engineer, you play a critical role in your organization, often juggling multiple responsibilities to drive success. In today's webinar, we'll be diving into the staff 4 archetypes that Will Larson famously categorized into tech lead, architect, solver, and right hand. So stay tuned for our panelists' insights and their experiences. We're going to be starting first with the first topic with insights about what each archetype looks like in practice and how they function in different organizational contexts. So I'm going to be asking each of our panelists questions about one archetype so we can all have a shared understanding about what each is and what it looks like. Like Shweta said, and I think Liam also referenced, most of our panelists have kind of worn different hats already. But we're going to keep the conversation focused to make sure that you get the best knowledge. So we're going to be starting with Shweta. And what is the solver archetype, and in which situations have you used it?
I think by the time sort of you get by the time you get to staff, you solve. You've played a role in many of the archetypes. However, the solver one is the one that I find really interesting and challenging. And first, I want to start with what is the solver archetype. Yes, Will Larson has described them, but I'll just give a quick overview. In this archetype, as a staff plus IC, you're entrusted to dig deep on a problem. And sometimes this problem is very complex or something that other people have tried to solve and they haven't been successful at it. And that is the key part when you're thinking of a solver archetype and your goal in this role is to find a path forward. It doesn't mean you solve this entire problem all by yourself, but the key part you play is to find a path forward and then influence that path with the team that you're working with. And this is the part that I love the most, is to finding that path, diagnosing the problem, and then working together in a team to solve the problem. The one key part I would say in this archetype is really something I had to learn, and it took me many years to get to this point, is to really protect your calendar. Block out times for you to dig deep and really protect that calendar. And it means that you have time to not just dig deep by yourself, but you're also going to work with the team, but protect it from other people outside the problem. That is the key aspect of this archetype. I have played this archetype a couple of times, 2 or 3 times in my career so far. And the one that I find the most intriguing and was really hard for me personally was I facilitated a migration that was stuck for many, many years at Recursion. And that was a migration that was stuck because there was one application that nobody could migrate. And I was able to jump in, figure out the root cause of the problem, and then do the IC work myself to migrate it, and then migrate the entire suite of applications into the new cloud. And really, I don't want to get a lot of details because I really love this problem, but the key part was to find why that application could not be migrated, find the root cause, solve it, yourself, so myself, but at the same time, I was doing other things. So I had to figure out how to block my calendar, and then finishing up the migration. So the company had only one cloud bill. We had one consistent way to do everything in, including security, which is a key part, infrastructure, and so that's the thing that I would say was something that I enjoyed personally.
Thank you, Suwata. I think for me, the solver is the first archetype that I played as well. And it was a similar kind of migration story, except that I had no idea about the domain, but
Yes.
I knew people that could help. And I think that's kind of one of the key things. You don't need to be the expert, but you need to be able to level up. So
That's right.
protecting your calendar becomes basically the base, the pillar of you being able to get anything done. Thank you, Sweta. So now we're gonna move on to Michael. And Michael, what is the tech lead archetype, and which projects benefit from it?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the way when I think of a tech lead archetype is it's probably the one that's closest to almost like a senior plus plus from sort of how I've seen it. So tech lead is normally working within one team or maybe 1 to 3 sort of closely related teams where you are quite closely embedded. So rather than solving in a particular problem area, maybe as the solver, or as Shweta was just saying, it's more focused on supporting those teams and the execution of what they're working on, which can be one project, if it is just one deep space. But at least in my experience, what I found when I've worked in this sort of role before is it often is most beneficial when the team is working on sort of many different strands. I think it can be quite challenging at first to get out of the maybe senior engineer mindset when you're writing more of a code and trying to understand, okay, how can you add the most value? But what I've sort of had benefits from in the past is trying to make sure that the team sees the overall vision and sort of coherent, particularly if there's maybe in more times of instability. So, typically you would partner with a manager of the teams to help with this, so sort of the management and the IC side. But at my current company, one of the ways it was described to me, as well as being in the Staff Plus role, is helping to advance engineering across the company, or sort of help push the technical direction forward. And so then in terms of how I see that is benefiting, as I said, if you've maybe got a team who's working on quite a few different projects, making sure you're providing the right level of support, but also making sure that they can actually see how this ladders up into the general company. So taking them from, rather than feeling like, okay, we're just working on a bunch of projects, we don't really understand how, maybe we're doing these migrations because somebody told us, hey, here's a ticket, you need to update this library or you need to move to this thing, really help sort of guide them and say, this is the value that we're adding, this is why we're doing it, seeing how you can support, again, sort of on the technical side, taking that back, because typically you would have more exposure. So, you have the exposure within the team of what's going on, but then also outside, maybe talking to the other staff engineers across the organization, maybe you have more of a voice with management in different parts, and just using that and sort of making sure you're then able to add your value as someone who has those audiences, rather than just being directly within the team.
Amazing. It sounds to me that you're kind of essentially being the glue between the
Yes.
engineers and the organization, isn't it? And you're kind of just moving everyone forward.
That's, if it goes well, that's the plan. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. We're gonna move on to Dima. And you referenced that you've been an architect. So does your role title of architect mean you take on the architect archetype? And what does this archetype look like in practice?
Yes, the architect archetype is what I gravitated towards naturally. I found a super simple way to explain it, a real simple way. Imagine you join a big company, and obviously certain things are broken. And when you try to uncover the layers and figure out why is it so broken, oftentimes it's going to be some piece of tech debt introduced many years ago that was carried over and not fixed because nobody had time for that. And I think my role is effectively doing this one and one thing only, making sure that 5 years from now, people do not say these things about what the team is working on today. That's it. And yeah, it's we're going to talk about books, I assume, and I'm solidly in the Martin Klapman side, design data intensive applications. So that's the architect archetype is the closest I found in my life to being this hands-on evangelist, so to speak, making sure that whatever has to do with foreseeing issues that could stem from bad decisions in architecture, in databases, in communication layers, understanding this first from the inside, and then as an organizational perspective, as how teams work together, how the departments communicate. That's what I think is the most exciting part about the architect archetype. So you have to understand how this particular organization, these particular people and teams, take the tasks and put them into code that runs. And you have to envision what it's going to look like 5 years from now, foresee pitfalls, and try to mitigate them. And at first try to highlight them so that people buy into that and believe you. And then you try to steer the ship slowly so that there's not much work to do, ideally less work to do, and the mistakes are avoided. It's far cheaper to avoid them than to fix them later on. That's what I do.
Thank you. So as you said, you kind of focus on the people, and you're trying to kind of get them to go into a future that you envisioned where you're preventing mistakes. Yes, is that right?
Aren't we all?
Yeah, yes, we are all, but I think it's really, it's really good the definition you gave of the architect. Like, because a lot of people think that architects just draw boxes and diagrams. Okay, and this is quite a different view of an architect. Thank you for that. So now on to Liam. You have told us previously that you've been jumping between different archetypes. What is your experience with being the right hand as a staff class engineer?
So my main experience as a right hand basically was all about like connecting the business with a group of engineers. So I'm a front-end engineers, and my role at Rex was like really like to lead the front-end guild, and which is like all of the different like front-end engineers across all of the product teams. So in practice, what does it mean? It means that like officially I have no direct reports, nobody's reporting to me, but unofficially I'm responsible for all of the front end and the front end engineers. So that's how it works basically in my current company. Like the main part of like the right hand for me is like, it's creating this bridge in between like, the exec and the developers. So that's a really, in practice, what it means that like I'm spending a lot of time with all of the different engineers, like really trying to understand their problems, spending times with them, trying to solve this problem or trying to help them in any possible ways, trying to understand them, understanding their skills, and how can the business really help them develop. And also, on the other hand, is like spending a lot of time with the exec, trying to understand what are the company needs, what is the direction of the companies, and really like trying to make a connection between the two, and how can like basically the two groups work together hands to hands to achieve something. So as an example, basically like of like the bottom up like from dev basically to exec would be like spending time with engineers to create like a technical roadmap for the front end. So gathering like all of the different parts of the application, what are the problems that engineers are experiencing across basically the different teams, grouping all of this information and prioritizing it, so that like we can have like buy-in from exec into like time to solve like this particular problem, which is the biggest one at the moment. In the opposite direction, it would be like having like execs telling us that the incident rates are growing, which is something that we should be going in the opposite direction. So this means like having the agency of like spending time with engineers, creating like some tooling to reduce this incidents, the number of incidents, and the criticality of the incidents. And also like in terms of like right hand, we're often really talking about like borrowing authority. So I'm not a manager, I do not have the authority basically to do things, but then like I have basically the power of like creating basically events, like what I did is like, for example, front end events where like engineers will like have dedicated time where they can have like social, but like also hack days, or like time really to develop the skill and spending time together basically. So those are like would be like an example of like directly of like borrowing authority from like above to create like an environment and a sense of community in the group.
Thank you for that. I like that it's a two-way conversation, and it's not only kind of pushing business onto engineering, but also voicing their opinions. Well, thank you everyone for this intro to the four archetypes. Now we're going to move on to the next topic of our webinar, which is what are the key competencies for each one of the roles that we just kind of introduced. What is the technical expertise and what are the leadership abilities that you need? And we're going to go back to Dima. And what would you say are the most important skills when acting as an architect?
Oh, that's a big one. So, first of all the archetypes, we all work with people. I guess we established that. And this idea of establishing credibility in the first place and being the glue between the organization and engineering, that's in our DNA. That's what we're supposed to do. In my understanding, when it comes to being the architect, fundamentally it's the skill and art of being able to see the problem so that on the one hand, the engineers trust you to represent them. You know what their challenges are, you know what they struggle with, and when it comes to explaining the higher ups, hey, this may need more attention. We can't take shortcuts here, but here we should not. It's just going to backfire. You want to be their best friend and their advocate. But then on the other hand, you want to enable them. So you need to use your knowledge so that if certain decisions are effective enough as is, defend them, give them the green light. If they're not, well, you better make sure that the higher ups understand that certain investment is due, otherwise bad things are going to happen. So the biggest skill here, I would say, is literally connecting the dots. It's three huge universes. There is the technology itself, what and how to use for which problems. It's the extracting the pains and the current work of the engineers, and it's making sure the business understands you because you can speak their language to help them prioritize accordingly. That's probably what I do most of my time. And I'm thankful for other archetypes because I can afford to spend more time on technology as opposed to, like, I'm really bad at operations, like real bad. So I don't have to touch Jira. I can just talk to people and things happen and they're thankful to me. That's my dream.
Thank you for that last phrase, Dima, because it's important to also acknowledge that we all have limitations, but we become really good at the specific skills that the roles require. So let's move on to Sweta. And what about the skills required for the solver archetype? Do you need to have that deep technical expertise before you can take on the role, or can you gain it during the project?
Yeah, it's a good question. I want to take a little step back with what Dima said, just to talk about like he said, we need to have certain things in our DNA. I actually had looked at it in a way that there's a base class. You know, everybody here is an engineer, and there's like understanding this. There's a base class which all archetypes, as staff plus ICs, have to be. You kind of have to be responsible. You know, you should know how to connect dots. You should know how to solve problems and work with people. Now, when it comes to the solver archetype, the skills I think that you really need to possess is really having an open mind when you're entrusted to solve a problem that you know, first nobody can solve. So you should go in there with an open mind saying, hey, let me just look at what's going on, right? That's the way I think is a big skill. The second skill that I would highly recommend that you have is the ability to think critically. And that you need to develop as time goes. But critical thinking is another skill that a solver archetype, I think, needs. And then again, the part which is I'm coming back to is then be able to work with a team to solve that problem and get something over the line. For me personally, I have found that a systems thinking approach helps me as in this role. Whether it's mostly not just solver, but any role as a staff plus IC, it has really helped me. And a book I would highly recommend is Thinking in Systems by Donella H. Meadows. I'm actually rereading it or listening to it right now as an audiobook. And it really system thinking focuses or forces you to think about the system as an overall, rather than just the application or just that little piece of code or just that little a box, like you said earlier, Bianca, is and where does that fit into the entire system? And it actually forces you to identify the system rather than just a set of events or just some problem that you're focused on. It actually helps identify patterns in the system, which will then allow you to find what are the underlying structures that might cause these events or patterns that you're seeing in the system. This really helps when you think about, you're trying to solve a problem which involves some processes, and that's the time I've seen system thinking work really well. And as a solver, to answer your question about the second part, which is, do you have to have deep technical expertise? I think I've seen both sides be there, where sometimes, let's say when I was working at Cisco, and I was not a Staff Plus IC at the time, but Cisco is a networking company, and sometimes some problems needed somebody to have deep technical knowledge about a protocol, and only that person could do that job. And so I've seen that. But on the other hand, I have personally witnessed myself not knowing anything about AWS or the domain, being asked to jump in and solve a problem. So I think I've seen both sides work. And I personally, from my personal experience, the 2 or 3 times I've been a solver, I have had to jump in, learn the domain. Again, like I said, I want to reiterate this: open mind and critical thinking are the 2 key elements when you are in this archetype to solve problems of this nature.
Thank you, Sweta. I think, when you were describing your approach, I was remembering I spent almost a decade on call rotas, and by the time I became a Staff Plus engineer, I found that the experience I gained by diving into incidents and also working with others, like teaching me to zoom out, don't go and look at the code, look at the system, was actually what enabled me to then take on the solver archetype quite easily, because I had gained that experience without realizing what it was. So on-call rotas have their side benefits.
I just want to add one thing, Bianca, like what you just said. As engineers, we are really good at diving in and not zooming out, and that's the one element I would highly recommend. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you, Shweta. Absolutely. It's a skill to learn to zoom out. Now we're going to move on to Liam. As a right hand, what have you focused on? Which skills?
I think for me it would be, trying to understand like different point of view. So it's kind of like, as a right hand, like, you're trying to bridge like, basically 2 different group of people who thinks very differently. So it's all about like, trying to understand the needs of each of the group. So it's a very social role. So it's all about like, building the connection and building the trust in between like, the different groups. So on the one side, basically working with dev, that's mean like, spending time basically really listening to different engineers, to all of the engineers actually, like not only like the senior engineers, but also the junior engineers, listening to them, but also like, being able like to diving into the code, also like trying to understand basically concretely, are they just telling me that they want to refactor this thing just because they want to learn it, or is there like, a real need for that? So, it's both also like, speaking, but also be able like to dive into like, the technical of each of the thing. It's also like, being able like, to help basically engineers like, into a one-on-one mentoring, pairing, coding, and, or like maybe also like, just connecting them to a relevant person. So, we're talking about like, having an expert into an area. So if I'm not the expert into that really technical area, that's also like, being able like, to connect them with the relevant person in the company or outside of the company. Being also like, the right hand means like, you're in kind of like a privileged position. You are not their manager. So they can talk to you much more about, things that they have trouble with. That's, it's a very like advantageous position to be, because, they would trust you a bit more because, you're not like, directly impacting the promotion or thing like this. So that's, on one side. And the other side is like, is working with exec, and it's really all about like, demonstrating basically the impact that you had basically in the past, but also demonstrating the future impact that you and your team can have. So it's kind of like really showing like, like concrete ownership basically of like the front end or any other like domain, and like, showing that also like you have good prioritization in terms of like, you're not just trying to build for fun, but you're just trying to build basically so that like you're trying to solve the right problem that's geared towards the business need. So it's really like, putting yourself into like, the exact shoes into like, what they want to achieve and how can technically we achieve that basically.
Thank you. And I like that you mentioned that you need to know who to connect people to, because I realized that that's a skill. Some people just know who to ask questions to, and that is just as powerful or even more as knowing the answers yourself. Thank you, Liam. And now, we're gonna go back to Michael. And with being a tech lead, is it more about leadership, the technical expertise, or a combination of both?
Yeah, thank you. So I do think it's a combination of both, which I know sounds like the easy answer to say, but also to dig into those a little bit. So, I think the leadership part is very, very important. And I think is one of the main parts, because the way I think of the technical expertise side is you need enough knowledge to back up what you're saying to help build the trust with engineers as well, but you're trying to avoid stepping on any toes. What I mean by that is when I've been in teams, typically you would have senior engineers, or even if you do have more junior engineers, what you don't want to do is be that staff plus engineer who just does everything. A new task comes into the team and you're the one taking it, you're the one picking up the work, and because then nobody learns, nobody grows. And so on that part, I think it's trying to give that space, but then equally when it is needed, so if someone gets stuck, being able to sort of back that up. And so being able to dive in and help them, and also to build that trust. I think that's one thing that I actually really did benefit from. And I know this was, unique to my situation and not everybody is in the situation. But when I first moved into this tech lead role, I had been a senior engineer in sort of some of the adjacent teams before. And what this meant is when I was helping with some of these bigger decisions, or saying, okay, I think we need to be doing this and we should avoid this. So I think this is the path we need to take. I could kind of back that up of the engineers I was working with had known that I'd worked on similar features before. So even though I wasn't writing too much of the code, they kind of could trust me. And so they didn't think I was just someone coming in from the outside, telling them what to do and then leaving them to it. So I think, technical expertise is important in that sense, but as also was saying earlier, I think it's the leadership part, kind of being able to help set those priorities. If there's issues in the squad or a team, okay, should we be looking at this or looking at this, where you can provide that leadership of saying, okay, here's the company priorities that I know about, or I know this other team is waiting on us to deliver this, or this is how it fits into that system. Sort of resolving those disputes and helping folks and engineers grow, I think is also an important part. So sort of a combination of both, but in slightly different ways.
Thank you, Michael. I think before we continue with the webinar, I'm going to check the Q&A. I think there was a question about the book recommendation from Sweta. We're going to be posting the link on the Lead Dev Staff Plus Slack so that people can have a look at it. And we have one more question, which is, it's more about career paths. A lot of people assume that you need to have a computer science background and formal training to be able to kind of go up the career ladder and become a staff plus engineer. How much is that correct? What do our panelists think? Raise your hand virtually or physically and let me know. Who would like to start?
Dima, I saw you raise your hand.
Oh, sorry, I thought Shweta unmuted.
Oh.
Well, look, the short and sweet answer from me is, thankfully, our industry gets to internalizing that degrees are not mandatory to be awesome. And we are ahead of the universe, ahead of the curve compared to other industries. Yes, I personally know tons of great people who became STEP plus engineers with backgrounds from electrical engineering to literally psychology, which I think is awesome. Keep it up.
Thank you, Dima. Anyone else would like to add? Sweta?
Yeah, I think, I'm kind of torn on this one because I come from a computer science background, systems kind of background approach. I do, on the other hand, believe that anybody can do anything if they put their mind to it. And so a lot of these things can be learned and can be acquired, I feel like, because a lot of the times, again, you're not really the smartest person in the room. You are trying, you need to use your experience. And if you have, because by the time you get to Staff Plus, you've solved enough technical problems that I don't think at that point the degree really matters. It's what have your experiences been? How hard problems have you solved? And also in some ways, as you solve these problems, you gain more experience, you learn, and then you grow. And as you grow, and that's why you are Staff Plus. So I think either path would work if you have the passion and desire for to do the job is my thought around it. Yeah, I think especially for staff, I think you will get here only from hard problems that you've solved as an IC. And so I don't know if I'm swaying the audience one way or the other, but I think it's doable if you, yeah.
Thank you, Sweta. I think Michael wants to add something.
Yeah, no, so I was just going to say, I think it is a really good question. So I actually speak this as someone, so I don't have a computer science degree or a computer science background, and I've pretty much learned on the job throughout my career. And yeah, that's one thing that I found is there are definitely areas that I would struggle with, and I still do struggle with, and it comes to sort of some of the really deep technical concepts. For example, scaling backend systems is not something I've had experience with, and I've also had no education there. So if I suddenly got moved to a backend team trying to do that, I would struggle and I'd have quite a steep learning curve. So instead, throughout my career, I've tried to lean on more of the skills that I do have. So obviously, I've worked in enough engineering teams, as Shweta was just saying, so they're having enough projects to back that up, but then leaning more in on, I know, for example, I'm very good at spotting patterns and seeing sort of connections between teams and areas for improvement. And I think, that's actually even one of the things that's really nice about these archetypes and talking through this webinar is, I said, I've been more on the tech lead side, maybe a bit of right hand in some other areas, but that's allowed me to use my skills that I've developed. And I've been lucky enough throughout my career to then work with other Staff Plus engineers who are the solvers, the architects, who actually we're able to work together. So, I can go to them and say, hey, I'm dealing with this really tough problem. Can you help? And then I can get a solution from them, kind of know what questions to ask. And then I'm, maybe have a different skill set to them where I'm able to better look at then how we could work with the different engineers, plan that or see how that fits into other solutions. So, I think, in my experience, it's just knowing what your strengths are, whether that's coming from a computer science background or not, and just making sure, you kind of, as I said, maybe look at these paths and pick one that best aligns with your background as well.
Thank you for that, Michael. I will add a bit of my experience because while I worked at the BBC, I was in a lot of interview panels, and one of my favorites were actually a program that we had for people who were transitioning to tech from other industries, and some of them have done boot camps, some others had kind of learned to code by themselves. And what we used to discuss was on the kind of leadership skills, other people nailed them because they had professional backgrounds already. They weren't starting from zero, but what they needed to plug in was kind of the technical and the domain expertise and all the technical processes and everything. So you will see that if you come from another professional background, you're gonna have to level up, all kind of technical expertise. But if you come from a computer science background, what you're gonna have to invest on is on the people skills. So each way you're gonna have to complement and level up. And now we're gonna move on to our third topic for today, which is about actionable strategies to sharpen your skills and become an expert in whichever archetype. So we're gonna go back to Dima. And what is your advice to someone who is in the early days of their Staff Plus role and looking to promote?
I have so much to say. Let me try to be brief. So one is, every time I say it, people like it. So I guess it's true. If you look at the axis of seniority, the more senior you get, the more personality, the more individuality has to show. Like, to put it blunt, for most companies, entry-level and mid-level people are sort of fungible. You can assume once you have a certain skill set, you can fill in any projects, more or less. Once you grow, and I think above the staff level is where this really shows, you need to find what fits your passion, what fits your preferred way of getting things done, what drives you, what gives you pleasure. And in my experience, since I prefer to be on the technology side, what really, really helps is to be able to prove to engineers that I am hands-on at their level, or at least at their level, or better. And the language I tend to speak in this case is the language of POCs. So we talk to people, they say, oh, this is an issue, we cannot do this and that, because, and they make some strange claim which I am not confident is correct, like Dynamo cannot handle that, or Kafka requires more than 10 partitions to make it happen. If I can prove within literally single-digit days that, hey, that's not true, have you tried this and that? Look, green threads here do miracles. That's the best way to earn their credibility. And if you do this, in my case, I'm quite passionate about that, so I do it regardless. Like on the job, off the job, between jobs, for fun. This enables me to understand things from the bottom up, and that's exactly what helps me build this credibility that I desperately need in the early stages of getting to know a new team. So yeah, I do recommend this. If you want to grow into the architect archetype, which is your case, I think I would recommend you go there. If you feel like being a tech advocate, being the technologist is what suits you best. If you go in there, build tons of toy projects and surprise yourself and others with what technology can or cannot do based on some standard-ish or non-standard-ish applications. That's going to make you into a professional quickly enough. Yeah, that's as short as I can make it.
Amazing. Thank you, Dima. And now we're gonna reach out to Michael to tell us what changes as you move up into more experienced Staff Plus roles. What skills do you say become more important to invest in?
Yeah, so there's sort of one I'd like to touch on, which is quite interesting, I found. So there's a lot of talk about active listening as you move up in your career. You know, how do you pay attention to someone directly in a conversation, listen to concerns, listen to what's happening? But one skill that I found that's actually really benefited me is what I call, well, not I call, but like sort of the passive listening. And it's sort of that giving yourself the space and time just to observe and pay attention to what's going on. So whether this is just, I mean, to be honest, I make myself very nosy. I put myself into lots of Slack channels and I often try not to respond, but, you know, I just read and I listen to updates. And sort of looking at those patterns, because I think when you're in more of a senior role, you know, you're very much focused on okay, what's happening in the here and now? What are the immediate problems that's affecting it? So it could be, hey, we need to integrate with this system, but the tests are failing. We really need to try and unblock it, but it's tough because we have this deadline, and you're very focused on this is the immediate problem we need to solve. And from moving into the staff role, to me, it's like, okay, well, I try and sort of passive listen. So I'll observe these problems, I'll pay attention to them, but then maybe I'll see, okay, I'm in some other team Slack channels and I can see that they're also having some problems with the testing infrastructure. And then maybe I heard on, you know, sort of like a stand-up call that someone else is too. And from that, then that's where I can sort of bring my benefit of looking at, okay, well, it looks like we have a bigger problem here. You know, as a senior engineer, everybody's focused on their area, but having that skill of sort of this passive listening, paying attention to what's going on, and then bringing that value back to the organization. So saying, hey, you know, looks like we have a bigger problem. What can we do to solve it? Is there something we need to be concerned of here? And so I think it's that, and actually, you know, giving yourself the space to do that too. You know, if you're always busy, you're always focused on exactly what's in front of you. I mean, seeing the woods for the trees, I think is a saying, then it's quite tough to progress and sort of tackle these staff plus level challenges. So I think that's something I've learned, is that I give myself space to be nosy and just keep listening.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm afraid, we're reaching the end of the webinar. I know that there's some outstanding questions in the Q&A. We're going to move them to the Lead Dev Slack. We're going to kind of quickly wrap up. So thanks to our panelists for sharing their insights. Now it's time to wrap up. Let's quickly go around the room and summarize in a sentence, what is your top advice for navigating between the 4 staff plus archetypes? We're going to go now in reverse alphabetical order, starting with Sweta.
So to move between archetypes, the one thing I would say is understand the problem that you're solving and try and ask a lot of what and why questions to the problem, and then dive, be very mindful and say, okay, I am being this because of that, and then do the needful for each archetype, as you've heard from this webinar. So I think really be curious, open-minded, and start to understand the problem before diving into the archetype or the problem.
Thank you, Sweta. Next one is Michael.
Yeah, I would just say, make sure to focus on what you enjoy. I think all of these archetypes have very different parts. Some are more dealing with people, some are more dealing with systems. But if there's a part of it that you're not enjoying, then you're not going to be effective. So, I think just said, read the blog, or hopefully you've taken some things away from this on the patterns that are relevant to each, and just go for the one that is most interesting, excites you the most. And I think that's the way to be most successful.
Nice one. Thank you, Michael. And now, Liam.
For me, that would be a thing. Don't be afraid of asking for help. Just, when you start something new, really, ask other staff engineers if they have experienced that, and try to get their help from. If you don't have any other staff engineers, reach out to the community. There's this amazing Slack channel with a lot of other staff engineers there. But it could be not limiting yourself to other staff engineers. As we said, this role is a very social role, and it's a people role. So there's a lot of other basically work and people who work in your company that can really help from different domain there. So it doesn't have to, it's not a pure technical role anymore. So it's a people role also. So ask for help.
Thank you, Liam. And thank you for highlighting, bringing back the being vulnerable and asking for help, because it's such a critical thing in our roles. And now we're gonna finish with Dima.
I'll be super quick. In 2 words, be proactive. That's what's expected from you. And with the archetypes, I guess it means at least 2 things, at least along 2 dimensions. Number 1 is look for allies beforehand. Oftentimes you can't predict who you will be working with in various roles. Sometimes you would rather not play some roles, so you can volunteer someone to play that staff plus archetype, which is awesome. So you can help them get promoted and get the work done, which is what you're hired for. And the other aspect is be proactive in telling which archetype would be needed where, so that you can strategically place yourself where your skills shine, and strategically prepare replacements or partners where you think you would not be the best fit to have things happen the right way.
Thank you, Dima. Thank you so much for all the good insights in today's panel. We're going to be heading now to the Lead Dev Slack in the #StaffPlus channel. Please head there to continue the discussion. We're going to be back in September 4th for our next Staff Plus webinar. It's going to be focusing on navigating feelings of isolation. We're going to be announcing the panelists for that very soon. And thanks for joining, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.